Yes, exactly.
Without eating the mic.
If technology is not interfering with your life, how can we possibly have a 21st century moment?
This is very true.
Yes. So you have just finished studying the career of excuse me. Sorry,
Yet another book about Alexander the Great.
Alexander the
Yet
Great.
another one.
What are we to know about the second half
Second half.
of his career?
Uh-huh.
And start us off with this. What marks the second half?
Oh, first half of his career was the destruction of the great king, the king of Persia, the Shah of the King of Kings. Uh, and after the destruction of the Persian monarchy,
Mhm.
what next? A lot of Alexander's soldiers naturally assumed that what next?
Was
Go home.
we're going home.
Lots of loot. Vast amounts of loot, truly incredible amounts of loot. The
Hmm.
Persian kings had accumulated enormous treasure in 3 or 4 different cities. Alexander had other ideas. He meant to move from the heartland of the Persian Empire to its eastern domains that were always kind of loosely governed.
Okay.
He meant to establish his authority there and to go even further. He meant to go to the end of the world as he understood it from his tutor Aristotle, who had no idea how big Asia actually was. Alexander had this ambition of going all the way to the ocean. So first secure the eastern regions, the Persian Empire that had always been loosely ruled.
Ah,
Eastern regions. Now that brings us into Afghanistan, Kyrgyzstan, Tajikistan, Uzbekistan, brings us into Kashmir and Punjab. The Persian Empire was almost unimaginably large. These eastern regions are loosely governed.
were
Alexander,
they governed at least that they were still able to collect revenue?
uh, Persian practice was to appoint regional, for most of the empire, in most of the empire, Persian practice was to appoint regional governors, satraps. They raised revenue and sent some of it as demanded to the great king. They
Mm-hmm.
maintained a basic road system for the great king and stations for couriers in the service of the great king, relay riders, you might say. And they were to raise troops as directed. They could raise troops on their own because, of course, it's a long distance from the frontiers to the Persian king and one of his capitals. But all the capitals in the heartland of the Persian Empire, what we would call today southern Iraq and eastern Iran, pretty much. The heartland, or southern Iraq and western Iran, pretty much the heartland of the Persian Empire. So the regional satraps had to be able to raise some troops on their own, uh, but also, as directed by the great king, and send them to him. But in the eastern region, he was called King of Kings because the eastern region is so far remote. In eastern regions, there were tributary kings more than appointed governors.
Ah.
As tributary kings, though, they're expected, well, to offer some tribute occasionally
Mm-hmm.
and to provide troops as required.
Interesting. So they were analogous to vassals of the feudal era.
Yes,
Okay. And this was a relatively stable system.
was more, as with any empire, more stable in some regions than in others.
I've always been curious how Alexander, coming from this tiny Macedonian country, was able to topple these what seemed to me just behemoths of empires. Uh,
Machiavelli commented on that.
okay,
So, as I say, yet another book. Everyone's commented on Alexander
sure.
uh, and commented on him for a very long time. He had great difficulty in his eastern campaigns because he had to subdue, first of all, terrain was often difficult, had to subdue one tribe at a time. But Machiavelli made the comment that highly decentralized polities are easier to defeat in battle but harder to conquer. whereas highly centralized polities, harder to defeat in battle because they can muster great forces,
Hmm.
but easier to conquer. You take out the nerve center, and they're done.
Okay. So you can chop off the head of the snake
Yes,
and be in charge.
it's a highly centralized system.
Gotcha.
So the theme of the book really is so he took out the Persian army. He took out the Persian army in three very impressive victories. Occupied the Persian capitals. The king, the great king, fled from him, was eventually murdered by some of his own people.
Mm-hmm.
So the western regions and the heartland of the Persian Empire were overcome relatively easily. Uh, there was strong resistance from some places, including the city of Tyre, famously huge, long, difficult siege of Tyre. At the end of the siege, it was thoroughly destroyed, which the Jews regarded as fulfillment of prophecy in Isaiah,
Ah.
that Tyre, the queen of the seas, is going to get hers someday. Uh, he was welcomed in Egypt. Egypt had uh, always resented being ruled by Persia. Other regions seemed to resent it less. Egypt welcomed Alexander. Egyptian priests were willing to play up to Alexander's extraordinary, not to say insane, self confidence and suggest that he was actually a son of Amun Ra.
Ah. Whoa.
Uh,
Ah, there was a sycophantic streak to the religious establishment of the time.
the Egyptian priests had traditionally been in the service of the pharaoh.
Hmm.
Persian kings, although they were very, very tolerant for local religious practices, famously, of course, letting the exiled Jews return from Babylon to the homeland after the Persians kind of took over, really. Not yeah, overthrow is not the word. After the Persians took over the Babylonian Empire,
Mm-hmm.
uh, they never felt the need to play Pharaoh in Egypt. One of Alexander's inspirations was, ooh, the Egyptians hate the Persians anyway. They are welcoming me. They'll welcome me more if I give them the chance to adopt me as Pharaoh.
Ah.
So he made a pilgrimage into the desert to a shrine of Amun Ra, allowed Egyptian priests to declare him a son of Amun. And there's this disquieting uncertainty as to the degree to which Alexander might actually have believed something like that. We see this in the Hellenistic era following Alexander's time, already a tendency to assimilate uh, other religions to the Greek pantheon, so Ammon to Zeus. Uh, Alexander had extraordinary self confidence as well as tremendous ability.
Ah.
That was part of his charisma. It wasn't a charisma based on an outstanding physical appearance. It was the famous story that the after he overthrew the Persian monarchy, he met the women of the Persian royal family, accompanied by his closest friend ever from childhood, Hephaestion. Uh, Hephaestion was tall and beautifully built and outstandingly good looking. So the women of the royal family saluted him.
Oh.
Oh,
Oops.
Alexander was short, very fit, more a runner's build.
Hmm.
He
Interesting.
was quite a runner in his youth. Uh,
But
short,
wiry, perhaps.
very wiry, very
Uh-huh.
fit. Short, very wiry, very fit. Good looking, but not head turning.
Sure.
His charisma wasn't based on that. It was based on this overwhelming self confidence backed by an ability to charm and tremendous skill. He was good at a lot of things,
Okay. He was a true multi-talent.
and enormously so.
Uh-huh.
Uh, Alarmingly so. It is alarming to find that much ability
In one person.
packed
So
into one person of restless energy and apparently insatiable ambition. Not enough to overthrow the old Persian Empire. Not overthrow. It's the theme of the book I just finished. Really, just as the Persian Empire didn't so much overthrow the Babylonian Empire as take it over, it became increasingly clear to the discontented part of his army that he meant to take over the Persian Empire and in the process become somewhat Persian and somewhat less Greco-Macedonian.
Ah, he was going to start to blend his identity with
Yes,
the dominant culture of the area that they
yes,
were fighting in.
yes. By the end of his life, it's clear. By the end of his life, what a life. Hard fighting, hard working, hard traveling, hard partying, hard drinking. Wore himself out, took a nearly fatal wound in the course of one of his bizarre, why was he doing it? One of his campaigns in what's now Pakistan. So worn out by hard life, plus a nearly fatal wound, plus a devastatingly difficult trip through the deserts of what's now south, western Pakistan, southeastern Iran, uh, then possibly contracting malaria near Babylon. Worn out, died at the age of 33.
They're just 33.
33.
Oh, I thought he was closer to 40. I thought he was like 36 or 37. 33.
33.
So just a 15-year career upon ascending to the throne, right? Because he
13-year.
13 year.
Ascended the throne at 20 after his father's assassination. When his was first seriously involved in battle at the age of 16.
Mm-hmm. That's quite the life.
It's an extraordinary, extraordinary career. The theme of the book I just finished, second half of his career, is his series of campaigns to bring the eastern regions of the Persian Empire into obedience to him,
Mm.
and to fulfill or attempt to fulfill his fantastic desire to push all the way to the ocean.
Which he didn't quite achieve, right?
No,
Uh,
he was deep in what's now Pakistan
mm-hmm.
when his army indicated that they'd had
Charisma aside,
even the highest, charisma built up by extraordinary victories.
sure.
But still, if you march all the way from Macedonia to the middle of what's now Pakistan,
On your own 2 feet.
your own two
Right.
feet,
You didn't drive.
with three major battles and many minor battles, uh, one huge siege and several lesser, oh no, four major battles, many minor battles, one huge siege and many minor sieges on the way,
Mm-hmm.
you're tired. As has been pointed out, by that time they'd been gone for 10 years, which is exactly the length of the Trojan War,
Ah.
which is so foundational, the story of which is so foundational to their culture.
Mm-hmm.
So 10 years is a long time to ask any group of soldiers to be campaigning, but there's also a cultural sense that 10 years is
Enough.
enough.
Wow. He had children.
Yes, but
We don't know much of what happened to them. Is that
the,
true?
the children he did have were very young when he died.
Okay.
And in the, I should get a board game about this. I've got board games about lots of things,
Mm.
but a board game about the jostling for power in the aftermath of his death. Because really, at that point, he had only two children. One in Babylon, where he died, was just an infant. His daughter, his son by Roxanne. Uh, Possibly Roxanne, not Macedonian, but Sogdian, from what we call today Afghanistan. Possibly the only wife he ever had any romantic feelings for.
Interesting.
And then another son, a little older, from another wife, and kept somewhere back in the western domains of the empire, but neither of them emerged into history. there was a tussle for power among
His generals,
his
correct?
generals,
Okay.
because he died without leaving a clear heir.
And
He
was that deliberate on his part?
no,
Uh,
it's fairly clear he'd been grooming his childhood friend, possibly. Some biographers would suggest, lots of biographies of Alexander, possibly some biographers would suggest the only person he ever really loved, his childhood friend Hephaestion.
mm-hmm.
He'd been grooming him to be his second in command, and therefore presumably successor. But Hephaestion, very similar lifestyle to Alexander's, he died not long before Alexander did. Proof that even the youngest and strongest constitution is going to be worn out, from age 16 to age 33, pretty much 17 years of nonstop
Action of,
action, interspersed by severely heavy partying.
I wonder, right. Did that do more damage than the action? Hard to say.
Hard to say. The action's
Yeah.
pretty rough.
The action was rough. Yeah. Partying will get to you. Hmm. Wow. I think I asked you before we went on if Alexander looked back on his life with any cynicism, and you didn't think he did.
I think that cynicism begins to describe Alexander.
Okay.
Uh, that describes some of his generals.
Okay.
Uh, but he believed in he believed in himself. And he believed in his destiny. One of the themes of the book I just finished is that he began to think, and I think the author is probably correct,
Hmm.
not the first person to suggest this, he began to think that his destiny was to refound the Persian Empire, but refound it with a infusion of Macedonian and Greek blood and culture, but still Persian. He was definitely moving in a Persian direction by the time he died, which was creating tension with his army. There's lots of tension within his army. No one but Alexander could hold it together over the long run. With the Greeks and the Macedonians, who in theory were eternal allies, in practice, the Greeks had been beaten into alliance with the Macedonians. Uh, so there was tension. Uh, and between the Greeks and the Macedonians, on the one hand, there's tension between them and the various Asiatics. Among the Asiatics, there's tension between the Persians, Iranians, you might say today, and all the others. Because all the others, they had their warrior traditions, but they were a little tired of having been underlings to the Persians for so long.
Hmm.
The Persians emphatically had warrior traditions. Alexander was willing to work with that. So it was a increasingly multi-ethnic army.
Okay, so he had recruited replacements for losses
Oh yes,
from the very armies he conquered.
oh yes,
Okay. And what was the sales pitch there? We'll come work for us and you'll get paid
yes.
really well.
Well, especially for a warrior culture.
Hmm.
Uh, in the U.S. West, it was not too hard for the army to get Apache scouts to assist the army against other Apaches. The deal's pretty simple. You're a warrior. You're warriors. We'll give you a chance to continue being a warrior, and this time on the winning side.
And you'll get
You'll
paid.
get paid. Yeah. So, and military service in the Persian tradition was inseparable from nobility, similar with the Macedonian tradition.
Hmm.
So it was a way of affirming their self-respect
Ah,
after a very violent conquest, let it be said.
okay. So is it true to say that Alexander had some of the instincts that Rome later showed that we are able to beat people, but then get them in on the party?
Yes, He had that instinct which is utterly alien to the Greeks. Um, Utterly alien to them. The Greeks had even had a hard time accepting people from other cities. Um, it's alien to the Macedonians. The Greek attitude is summed up by Aristotle, Alexander's tutor. Uh, there are Greeks and there are barbarians. There it is.
And even among the Greeks, they were not particularly enthused about foreigners from other Greek cities.
No, Greek cities were very stingy with their citizenship.
Hmm.
Uh, Sparta, ridiculously stingy with its citizenship.
To its own demise.
To its own demise, the number of Spartans eligible for military service kept declining. I think I told you before these statistics, but want to explain the demise of Sparta? It's the decrease of the Spartan army from 6,000 to 2,000 over the course of a couple of centuries. They couldn't. Oh, 2,000, maybe the few, the proud, the Spartans. That's too damned few, and probably too damn proud. Versus what the Romans were able to do in Italy,
Mm.
as little by little, not without some severe bumps along the road, such as the social war of the 80s BC, but not without some severe bumps. But the Romans, little by little and somewhat irregularly, were willing to accept just about everyone in Italy into Roman citizenship. And just about everyone in Italy was willing eventually to accept Roman citizenship, with the result that the Romans had a military manpower pool of 200,000 and more. Uh,
Numbers that were
probably
inconceivable.
closer to a million. If you've got a manpower pool of close to a million, you can absorb the kind of, yeah, close to a million.
Yeah.
You think of able-bodied men of military age uh, with United Italy. Uh, if you've got a military manpower pool of a million, you can absorb disasters like Cannae. They're still disastrous,
Right.
but you can absorb them and keep on going. Alexander had something of that instinct, and it was very hard for most Greeks, let it be said, especially Greek intellectuals, a la Aristotle, very hard for them to accept this. It's a fascinating book. Second half of Alexander's career, you read about uh, his background being tutored by Aristotle, the Greek scholars he brought in his campaign, but along the way he encounters the ancient tradition of the Egyptian priests, the ancient tradition of the Babylonian priests slash scholars, the ancient tradition of the Persian magi, three of whom would famously visit Bethlehem one day. And eventually he encounters uh, Hinduism as he moves into the valley of the Indus River,
Hmm.
and Hindu sages and Hindu wise men. It's a fascinating cross-cultural experience.
Hmm.
And Alexander seems, one of the themes of the book, seems to have been increasingly open to that. As long as everybody acknowledged him as emperor
Right.
and did what he told them to do.
Sure. Sure. But he had a leniency towards religion that and a cross-cultural composition of his empire that other Greeks would have looked on with some amount of suspicion.
Yes, oh, definitely. Definitely. And there are many stories from his campaign that bring out that suspicion.
Hmm.
There was enough cultural tension between Greeks and Macedonians. Uh, then you add to that the tension between them, at least spoke Greek together, the tension between them and all of the races or ethnic groups that had been part of the Persian Empire, including, of course, the Persians themselves,
Right.
who were used to being on top.
And now they were taking orders.
Now they're taking orders. So Alexander increasingly showed care to bring them on board,
Hmm.
but definitely with him as king.
I see. What language were they all speaking?
Ooh. Greeks and Macedonians spoke Greek. There are many dialects of Greek. The Athenians were quite convinced that the Greek is Attic Greek.
Mm.
And subsequent, because the Athenians produced so many great writers, already by Alexander's day, there was a list of classics. So people in Alexander's time, including Alexander himself, would be quoting Euripides and Aeschylus and Sophocles, the way that educated people in America quote Shakespeare.
Interesting.
The historian I just read, she tossed in a little bit of a jab. She said, and perhaps with the same pretentious flair. Uh, so there were established classics all in Attic Greek. So that was the Greek that had already been established, partly to the annoyance of everybody else. But they accepted it. They all read these. Alexander constantly quoted Euripides.
Uh-huh.
Uh, then had all of the Greeks agreed in looking down, except the Macedonians, agreed on looking down in the Macedonian dialect. These various dialects of Greek. Then the Persian Empire had a lingua franca, the unifying language was Aramaic.
Aramaic.
But that was old. The Persians didn't create that. There's a wonderful scene in Second Kings. Jerusalem is being besieged by the Assyrians. This goes back 3 centuries. Jerusalem is being besieged by the Assyrians. The Assyrians, the Assyrian general gives a threat, the really scary threat to the people of Jerusalem. You're going to be reduced to eating your own dung and drinking your own urine if you insist on resisting us. And the king of Jerusalem, the king of Judah, says, uh, I speak Aramaic, use that, don't speak in Hebrew, but the Syrian general clearly could speak Hebrew, intended the inhabitants of Jerusalem to hear his
Denunciation of their resistance.
yes, resistance is futile, which of course it turned out not to be. Uh, in that episode, the northern kingdom had been destroyed, but Jerusalem was, from the biblical perspective, miraculously rescued. From the historical perspective, not that I'm setting opposition between these two,
Mm.
but it's something you find very often in ancient and medieval warfare. The army besieging a place, well, you've got lots of guys eating, lots of guys and lots of animals eating and pooping in the same spot
For months.
for months.
Ugh.
You have a hygiene catastrophe. Eventually, disease breaks out. So there are many examples of besieging army
Just breaking camp and leaving because,
and leaving as got being killed by an epidemic. So
and typically leaving their sick behind, or what was?
depending on how panicked they were.
Hmm.
Anyway, so Aramaic already was a lingua franca for the Western region of the Persian Empire.
Mm-hmm.
In Babylon, they still spoke Old Babylonian with great determination. Still has some records kept in Sumerian, which is impressive. Nobody spoke it anymore. Babylon itself, Aramaic was a lingua franca, but educated people there still made a point of operating in Old Babylonian and not the language of modern barbarians. Egypt it spoke Egyptian, blasted, darn it. Still used the hieroglyphic script. One effect of what they call the Hellenistic age, introduced by Alexander, is that the Egyptians would continue speaking Egyptian, but would no longer and writing Egyptian, but would no longer use the hieroglyphic script. They would write Egyptian with the Greek alphabet, which
Okay.
gives us what's called the Coptic language.
Ah,
So that's coming. Alexander's time, still the old Egyptian language. Uh, Around Jerusalem, still Hebrew. Uh, Same kind of thing. Increasingly a learned language. Aramaic was becoming the vernacular even for Jews. Uh, then in the western region of the Persian Empire, of course, all sorts of languages.
so what Alexander's staff would have employed a team of interpreters
Yeah.
for? Okay. And Alexander would have had a working knowledge of Aramaic or basically no exposure to it prior to arriving.
Prior to arriving, it's very doubtful he had any exposure to Aramaic.
Okay.
He operated in Greek,
Okay.
but there are many merchants and traders, including Greek merchants and traders, who could function Aramaic. And there was a long tradition of Greek mercenaries serving the Persian Empire.
Ah,
Alexander killed a lot of these Greek mercenaries.
and then hired their Persian comrades later
Correct.
to serve in his army.
Yes. As
Yes.
well as hiring lots more Greek mercenaries. Um, so yeah, the Aramaic remained the lingua franca of the western regions of what had been the Persian Empire. Although increasingly after Alexander's time, competed with Greek.
Okay. Wow.
And Persia, the Persian heartland, spoke the ancestral language to today's Farsi. And then once you get to the eastern regions, the Persian Empire, all sorts of languages.
Okay. So in Western Persia, it was Aramaic, but then in Central,
A heartland,
the heartland, it was what we would call Farsi today.
ancestor to Farsi.
Okay. The predecessor. Dang. And so they would have relied on traders and merchants they would hire them as interpreters
Yeah.
for the various functions of essentially what became both a moving headquarters and a moving court.
A moving headquarters and a moving court. He had
Hmm.
to have some subordinate headquarters, obviously,
Mm-hmm.
uh, as his empire grew larger.
Hmm.
And he had to leave garrisons in different places.
Hmm. In all the 13 years of his travels, is there any indication that for the space of, I don't know, even 6 months or a year, he was actually happy,
He was a deeply restless man,
deeply restless?
deeply restless. I don't think there's any point at which Alexander was content.
Hmm.
I don't think content was built into him.
Ah, not part of his personality.
At the very end, he was planning to invade Arabia.
Mm-hmm. Hmm. He would have died. He would have died in battle if disease and
Yeah,
exhaustion hadn't
almost
gotten him.
dying battle. The siege of a city in what's now Pakistan.
Hmm.
Uh, and the siege, he lost his temper. Part of his style was he'd direct the battle, but then he liked to have the decisive assault, what he meant to be the decisive assault, and usually it worked out. Decisive assault led by the companion cavalry with him at the head. At the head. So he would be involved in battle at the end.
Ah,
Uh,
so he basically put everything in motion, and then when he thought there was a moment for the decisive thrust.
yes. And he was never badly wounded until that siege of a city in what's now central Pakistan. The siege was too slow for him, and to encourage his troops, he dashed forward. The assault was proceeding too slowly. He dashed forward, climbed one of the siege ladders, leapt onto the wall with two companions. And this did inspire enough of his troops that they climbed up the ladder after him. Too many climbed up the ladder at once, and it collapsed under them.
Oh dear God.
So there was Alexander and two of his companions on the wall. Alexander thought the best thing to do is jump off the wall. So for a moment, it was just himself
Mm-hmm.
uh, being attacked uh, by numerous opponents. The two companions jumped down in time to save him getting killed. And then other soldiers arrived finally in time to save them from getting killed. He was very badly wounded. Came near death, had an arrow deeply embedded in him.
Hmm.
Greek surgery was in some ways very well developed. They had a fascinating collection of surgical tools, but they had a very poor knowledge of human anatomy. Uh, and it was always risky letting a surgeon go to work on you, and they had no anesthesia. Medievals had some ideas of anesthetics. They also had no idea of no idea of sanitizing wounds. Uh, the medievals had some idea of that.
Hmm.
Medieval surgeons would wash out a wound with wine, and they didn't understand exactly. They didn't have a
Why
theory
this
of
is
how to do
helping?
it, but it seemed to help.
Right.
The Greeks didn't have that. It was
Yeah.
tremendously risky. The surgeon dug out the arrowhead, in the course of which Alexander lost so much blood that darn near died. But he came back.
Hmm.
Never his full self after that.
Really?
Uh, he never completely recovered from that nearly fatal injury.
Huh.
And that was followed by a grueling march through the desert.
Wow.
The desert of what I think I mentioned that. What's now southwestern Pakistan, southeastern Iran.
Mm-hmm.
And that was deeply grueling. By the time he got back to the heartland of the Persian Empire, in retrospect, it's clear he's starting to wear out.
Ah,
He wouldn't admit it.
sure.
Couldn't admit it, probably.
He had never lived any other way.
Never lived any other way.
Right. He never relaxed.
Never. Astonishing thing to read about. That was part of his charisma. He was fascinating. He could be charming. He was funny. He was brilliant. He was good at everything he did. Physically fearless.
Mm-hmm. Wow. To combine that with, yeah, charming and funny and physically fearless and bright.
Very bright.
Yeah.
Successful at almost everything he ever did.
Hmm. Yeah. Truly, yeah, truly one of the remarkable personalities of history.
Even he, towards the end, he was asking too much of his army.
Uh-huh. Right. They were ready to go home.
They were ready to go home.
Hmm. Hmm. Well, speaking of people who are restless,
Hmm.
Tom, what's going on with Musk?
That is the question. I don't know. He kind of went off a lot, like really bad. Was that last week?
It seems to me that there's been some bad blood bubbling up between him and the president for the last 2 weeks, but
Mm.
I haven't followed it so closely that I could give you a precise timeline.
Yeah. Do you know the details, Father?
No, I don't. I
Okay.
know much more about Alexander the Great.
Okay. Well, I think a little more interesting. He well, so I think was it last 2 weeks ago, Musk said that he wasn't approving of the new bill that Trump was putting through.
Right.
He wasn't supportive of
Mhm.
Trump's
Big, beautiful bill.
Big beautiful.
budget proposal, or what's the
He didn't like the bill was how much the bill was for. It was 2.5 trillion.
Mhm.
Musk said, "We're never going to get better than this." So he started saying that. Trump was like, "Huh, that's weird," because he's like, Musk approved of this before he left. And then Musk said, "No, that's a lie."
Mm.
I'm like, I don't think Trump would lie about that. And then so Musk was getting more upset, and then he started calling Trump names. And then he felt like Doge didn't do anything, like it's just being overrun. Trump says, I don't know what you're talking about. There's 1.6 trillion being cut with this bill.
Hmm.
Not to mention all the tax breaks, all the help for families having kids, all these things. Really, a lot of good stuff. And then Musk was like, well, I still don't think we should do it.
I still don't think we should push through this legislation.
Yes.
Okay.
And then Trump was like, I think it's a good bill. Trump said it's the best one he's ever seen. And then Musk started getting really upset and said that Trump isn't who he thought he is, said that Trump's on the Epstein files,
Oh,
and then did a couple other things. He's kind of going off the rails.
oh no.
So at the end of that day,
We don't need that.
Trump was like, you know what? I'm sorry Elon Musk turned on me, but I'm sticking to my guns.
Hmm.
And then Musk has been backtracking a lot of what he said this week.
Interesting.
And very interesting thing well, two very weird things happened.
Oh, well, things weird.
The Democrats are now calling for the Epstein files to be released, which is wild because they said they didn't exist for forever. But now they want to get Trump, so they want to have the Epstein files released. And then the second thing was that the lawyer that was for Epstein before he died was,
Epstein's defense attorney.
yes,
Interesting.
was going through all the evidence and said in a statement after this thing happened, said he looked through and actually asked Epstein himself, was Trump ever involved with you in any incriminating way? And he said no. So the lawyer said he could find nothing that supposed Trump had any bad affiliation with Epstein. So, um, Musk then took down that tweet he made about Trump being on Epstein like a day later.
Huh.
Oh, the danger of tweets.
Now, backtracking and said he apologized for what he said last week.
Hmm.
And Trump has been asked, what did you think about the situation? He's like, he's not really thinking about it. He's got other stuff to do. So,
Probably the best answer.
I I'm on board with the notion that Twitter, now X, has made possible the dissemination of information that other motivated parties may have kept hidden from the public. And so I'm supportive of a font of information that may get information out past people who are motivated to filter the news. But it also makes very possible the airing of one's dirty laundry with other people in a way that I think is anti-healthy. How are we to balance these two things? Whatever happened to people have a
It's
disagreement?
James's advice.
Hmm.
Let every man be quick to hear, slow to speak, and slow to anger.
Hmm.
Slow to speak, which also means slow to Twitter.
Slow to Twitter. Twitter does not reward slowness.
Well, and people should reconsider their use of it because
Hmm.
Mr. Musk has permanently damaged himself by this intemperate twittering. Uh, it's a good rule, no matter what your position is in life and no matter what your information technology is. Let everyone be quick to hear, slow to speak, and slow to anger. Don't push the send button until you've carefully contemplated what you just wrote.
Take a deep breath.
And if it's
Take an hour to think about it. Take a day to think about it.
and if you're in a public position, bring in someone else to look at it.
I read Walter Isaacson's biography of Trump. Excuse me, of Musk. Bringing in someone else to look at it seems to be fairly difficult for his temperamental leanings.
Then he will have trouble in life.
Yeah. Well, he's had plenty of trouble, right? I mean,
That's true.
even before his involvement in politics, for years he's had trouble. And honestly, I think in Musk's, shall we say, defense, one of the things that he does seem to do well is forge ahead
Well, that's
despite
true.
opposition and cries of protest, right? There were plenty of people who were more than happy to say that his buying of Twitter was a bad idea,
He's
that his
not easily intimidated.
no,
And that's a
no.
good thing.
And that's it, right. Right. He's intimidated by no one. Yeah, there's
And that,
probably no one on the we know of no one on the planet that he fears.
that's safe to say.
Yes. Yep. But yeah, I guess these are two volatile personalities that we're talking about here.
They are.
Nah.
and I thought it was interesting. It was like the only thing Trump said really in response that I thought was interesting, he said, well, if you don't want us to spend so much, we can cut all of our government spending on Tesla.
Oh. The subsidies for Tesla,
So that was kind of a backlash. And then,
of course.
but after that, I don't think Trump really held to it. I think he was just saying something. I think he was kind of like saying, watch yourself, Musk.
Yeah. Well, this is a clear case where Trump has the opportunity to take the high ground.
Yeah. Which I think he's done.
By and large, he's done.
Yeah.
He has not said an awful lot. There was a couple of outbursts early on, but
Yeah.
Hmm.
So,
Yeah.
but one of the things I was kind of surprised is that I've seen, based on a lot of independent people I follow, they said that in the bill, it's the most pro-life bill they've seen.
The most pro-life budget bill.
So it does a lot of defunding for Planned Parenthood and other things. So from all that we could see, it looks really good. Like it gets rid of tax on overtime, tips, and Social Security.
Income tax.
I don't know if income tax is in there.
Income tax on tips
Oh
and
yeah.
okay.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, social.
Hmm.
And then a lot of good things for well, I think good stuff for the military, getting that stronger. Um, and then quite a lot of things Trump's trying to do overall. I think like the Golden Globe is in there.
What? Oh, yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Golden Dome, not the Golden Globe.
The Golden he doesn't
That's a
have his
different thing.
nomination for the Golden Globes.
That would be funny.
Right, right.
No,
And we're just gonna stick this in there. Yeah.
he is a pretty good performer.
Mm-hmm.
It's not necessarily my style, but you watch one of his rallies, he's a natural performer.
He's very captivating.
Yes.
You're saying Trump has a theatrical
Oh, yes.
that few people are willing to acknowledge.
A theatrical streak that, most people who go into politics have a theatrical streak. They're just not good at it,
Ah.
Mm.
as well as not being photogenic. It's the nasty
Mm.
old quip, politics is Hollywood for the ugly. And you look at some of them, oh my!
Oh my.
I'm in purgatory for that one. But,
Yeah.
most
Right.
people who go into politics have a theatrical streak. They're just not particularly good at it. Uh, Trump actually, he had no training as an actor, but he is a natural on stage. His speeches, to my taste, meander quite a bit. His rhetorical style, to my taste, is too much on the hyperbolic side. But he's got a natural talent for the stage. Improv.
Improv even.
He's very
Yeah.
good at improv.
Stand up.
Funny sometimes.
Yeah. Yep.
Did you hear his joke about him being the most famous person in the world?
No.
It was at one of his rallies, and he's talking about, it's like, my friend the other day was telling me that I'm the most famous person in the world. It's like, no, no way. It's like, well, who's more famous than you, Trump? And he's like, Jesus.
Well, let's hope so. Yes. Yes, I would hope so.
Yeah.
Huh.
But it was pretty funny, like his,
Yeah. Jesus.
yeah.
Yes, yes. That does lead me to right. Is Jesus still more famous?
Oh, sure. Yeah.
I think so.
But yeah. Trump occupies that middle ground at this point, middle ground between the huge characters of history and mere celebrities. He's somewhere in the middle. Although,
He's got 3.5 years to make it to the next
well,
tier.
already, I'm going to say already. There are people who hate me for this, and by this, I do not intend a blanket endorsement. But you look at his career so far, it's so extraordinary. Future historians, someone's going to write a history of the United States in 2010 and 2030 and call it the era of Trump. There's no doubt at this point that he is the central figure in American public life in these 20 years.
Even if you're deeply opposed to him,
Even if you're deeply opposed to him,
you're opposed to him, not to the Republican Party, not to their platform.
Yes, there's no question in my mind. Extraordinary story. And I can't. There are people who will be so angry with me
for acknowledging.
People I like. So there's always a risk, but I don't mean this as a blanket endorsement, but the very fact that they would be so angry says something about the grip that he has on them.
Yeah.
But I will say, by normal standards, he should have been finished at the start of 2021.
When he handed over power to the Biden administration.
And seemingly in disgrace. Obviously, he was not finished. I don't know of anyone else who could pull off a comeback like that. I certainly didn't anticipate it.
Yes, yes. Even Ben Shapiro was highly critical of his announcement of his second campaign, right? What's he doing it in this, in this particular venue, in this particular way? The timing is off, right? How will this will sputter out? Well, it it didn't sputter out, right? So it's true, even if you're deeply opposed to him, and many people still
Many
are,
people. Yes.
but the fact is no one has been opposed to Bush or Bush one or the Republican Party or conservatism in general the way they've been
Viscerally.
viscerally opposed to the current president.
Yes.
Yes.
And that demonstrates, as I said, that the grip he has on them and our people I like. And I hope they'll forgive me.
Is there any other American president who's evinced this level of cultural impact? I mean, Reagan, we still talk about Reaganomics. We still
Ye-
deal with his
Reagan in his
changes to the
way,
economy.
John Kennedy in his way.
Hmm.
A friend of mine was visiting, has done a great deal of work in Turkey. And he commented, people in Turkey talk about John Kennedy. Uh, for whatever reason, it's a kind of alchemy that gives a political figure huge cultural status. It's not easy to evaluate what it is.
Mm.
Not easy at all. But okay, George Washington had it
Mm-hmm.
in his totally unique way. Undeniably, Thomas Jefferson had it. Andrew Jackson had it.
He's interesting.
He's a very interesting man. I know I know a good high school teacher in a certain American metropolitan area uh, who's no Trump fan. He's a good history teacher. And inner city school. He's a good history teacher. He's got some bright students. And back during Trump's first term, some of his bright students, as he took them through American history, some of his bright students remarked that, Trump, that Jackson, he's kind of like Trump. Almost a comparable visceral reaction.
Mm.
People hated him passionately, or they loved him. Andrew Jackson had that kind of cultural impact. Abraham Lincoln. We forget this, but the people who hated him, by God, hated him enough to start a war.
You think the
People who
Civil
loved
War?
him canonized him.
Sure. He's still canonized today.
He's still canonized.
He's the only American presidential saint.
He's the only American president who has a temple all his own. Thomas Jefferson has this cute little rotunda, but Abraham Lincoln, he's seated like Zeus.
Yes, yes. Even Washington doesn't get that kind of
Washington gets
treatment.
this nice obelisk, but he's
Right.
not seated like Zeus.
Yes.
Abraham Lincoln had that kind of effect. Then you have to go to Theodore Roosevelt's.
Hmm.
Then you have to go to for whatever, various reasons. Franklin Roosevelt had that kind of effect.
Ah. As in their presidency was more than just running an administration in Washington. They had a sort of they cast a cultural shadow.
They became symbols.
Ah.
Cast a cultural shadow. It's a good expression. Cast a cultural shadow and became pretty lasting symbols.
Mm-hmm.
John Kennedy did that.
Let me ask you this. Was Kennedy's assassination good for the brand?
Since you have enough Irish in you, you can ask that question.
I do have enough Irish in me to ask that sort of question.
Frankly, it was.
What was that saying about
It may have been something a bit brittle about the Kennedy charisma. That's my guess.
Hmm.
And a second term, I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
But not only did he only have part of a first term,
2.5 years, right?
2.5 years, but also the tragedy, the crime of his assassination that went a long ways to painting a halo around him. Already he was having an impact, right? And a surprising cultural impact. Now my guess is, but it's only a guess, that it would have been a bit brittle. Nonetheless, he has to be on that list.
Ah.
Then Ronald Reagan has to be on that list. People I know will not forgive me for that either, but they'll be really mad. I said that Trump is on that list. Yes,
Washington, Jefferson, Jackson.
Andrew Jackson.
Well, then we jump to
We
Lincoln,
jumped to Lincoln. Then we jumped to Theodore Roosevelt.
Roosevelt,
Roosevelt,
Kennedy,
Reagan,
Reagan,
and Trump.
Trump.
Other presidents obviously have had reactions, positive and negative, sometimes strong positive and strong negative,
Hmm.
not like these.
Right.
Not this sort of visceral. This is not these sort of visceral reactions that show that he's already bigger than life.
Sure.
He's getting reactions, positive and negative, that are not entirely reasonable.
Not entirely rational.
They're
Can
not
we?
entirely rational. No. Again, I've got some people. Oh well. But it's not. There are people who are making him. On the one hand, there are some people who practically make him a vicar of Christ. Uh, then on the other hand, although it's gotten so old, it's lost a lot of effect. He's the second coming of Adolf Hitler,
Ah.
or at least Benito Mussolini. Fascist, fascist, fascist. The only piece of political vocabulary some people seem to know.
I know.
It, whatever is not that, but of course they don't bother to define fascism.
Hmm.
If anything, is vaguely nationalistic and vaguely populist,
Hmm.
and likes to talk about law and order. It needs to be fascist.
Right. Okay. So there's a way in which in 2040 we will still be talking about Trump in a way that we never are going to be talking about Bush 1
Absolutely.
or Bush 2
Absolutely.
or even Clinton.
Even
Although,
Clinton? Oh, yeah, absolutely. I mean, he got very strong reactions, but not on this level.
I see.
Positive or negative, not on this level.
Right.
An
Yes,
interesting thing.
he's going to join that group. Like he's going to be like Franklin Roosevelt. People argue passionately about Franklin Roosevelt to this day. And people will argue passionately about Donald Trump 100 years from now. And he's probably fine with that.
And he's fine with that. Yeah. Yeah.
He's probably very fine with that.
Yeah. No, that might please him. But that's actually, again, love him or hate him, that is his superpower, is that he's fine with a great many things. He's fine with wild levels of support, but he also seems to be sort of fine with intense opposition.
That's I don't. That's why I say I don't think anyone else could have pulled off his comeback, because normal people. I mean, he's not normal.
Let's just say it.
Just say it. Normal people, like I'm relatively normal. I couldn't handle. Already. I've said 3 times tonight. I hope people don't hate me. I couldn't handle that kind of hatred. I could not handle it. Which means I couldn't do what he's done.
Sure.
He seems to be able to handle it.
Yeah.
Well, people have asked him before, like, why can you accept and handle so much quote unquote persecution of your name and things like that? And he said that he doesn't think about him. He says that he's just on his mission. He knows what he wants to do, and he's focused on that. Like with all the court cases and things coming against him, and like, well, aren't you afraid you're gonna go to jail? It's like, no, I'm thinking about other things.
Hmm.
And it's interesting because it's almost like he lets things go. Like people will be like, aren't you enraged by what they said? And he'll only address it if he thinks it's an actual issue. If he doesn't, he's like, I don't really care. Which is very interesting because then it makes the angry people even more angry because he doesn't give them attention. It's kind of like the best way to stop an argument is not to say anything.
They're going to be quick to hear, slow to speak, and slow to anger.
Yeah.
Hmm.
But like, unless it's an actual issue, he doesn't really bring it up. Or if he sees someone like just being really bad, like he got off on Jimmy Kimmel or Jimmy Kimmel on the Oscars last year.
Hard to resist.
He said this guy should be fired. He's doing a terrible job. Which I think is kind of appropriate because, it's supposed to be the celebration of good art. And if the guy's making sex jokes on
Mm.
stage about the actors getting the rewards, he's not doing a good job. It's not tasteful, it's not good.
That was the one where John Cena had to come out on stage with just like the envelope in front of his
Yes.
groin. That was, yeah, that was in poor taste.
Very poor taste. And then
But I
he,
guess I understand that the host does have a great deal of sway over sort of
Mm.
the general flow of the show, shall we say. So like Jim, if I understand correctly, Jimmy Kimmel or whomever else can sort of decide, okay, these are the themes, the jokes, the punchlines we're going to go for. And so yeah, he was sort of in a position to make John Cena come out and
Can you make someone do that?
well, that was some of the controversy is that are all of these that was some of the controversy is that are even some of these prominent actors so compromised by someone who has secrets or the ability to smear their name so that they have to clown about in the way that is demanded of them.
Yeah, I wonder about that.
Not in a way, DiCaprio or Pitt wouldn't have to do that, but it's sort of one of these mid-level celebrities um, like John Cena or Olivia Munn or Jennifer
I can
Lawrence.
see that.
It's
Yeah.
like you're famous enough that people will recognize you, but you're not quite
The top.
powerful enough that you can do whatever you want.
Yeah, I can see that.
the surprising one, I think, was when he insulted Robert Downey Jr. Because
Mm.
this was the first Oscar he ever won,
Mm.
and he like downright insulted him in front of everyone.
Yes.
And you watch Robert Downey just kind of looks at him, was like, "You're really going there?"
Mm,
Like I guess to me, it's like, yeah, I think someone like that should be called out because you're not.
Well, at that point, what
Yeah,
he did with Downey, that was sheer bullying.
right, right, yeah,
I'm in a position where I can say what I want to say, and you can't really make an effective response.
hmm,
That was just sheer bullying, and he did need to be called out for that.
yeah,
because the show has to go on in a way that everyone you can bully someone, but they can't really push
They
back
can't push
because
back.
they
You've got the
you
microphone.
can't ruin the show.
You've got the microphone. You're the host. Yeah, he was taking undue advantage of that. So he crossed a taste line, the little stunt with Cena, but he crossed a moral line, not just taste. Crossed a moral line, bullying Downey that way, publicly insulting a man in a context in which he cannot effectively respond.
Ah.
That's a moral line.
Mm. Right, but it makes one if he's willing to publicly bully one man at the event, one can easily imagine that again in the case of John Cena, was he willing to privately bully him into that sort of stunt?
No.
It's hard to deny, oh, he wouldn't be willing to do that in order to get some guy out on stage with no clothes on. Although, of course, the joke with John Cena is you can't see him. So, so did it really happen? Did anyone see what happened? Interesting. Huh. Quick
yeah.
break?
Sure.
Let's take a quick break. It seems that you've been following the news in LA a little more closely than
Oh, well,
the average citizen, perhaps.
now do drive you to Bourbon.
I do drive you to Bourbon. How is this different than the Rodney King riots?
Lord of King riots, in my opinion. That's an odd phrase, in my opinion. Who else's opinion would I be giving?
Some people are particularly adept at parroting opinions they got from others.
Okay. But yeah, if I'm quoting somebody else, I'll identify the quote. But
A habit that is only learned under classical tutelage, I
this
think.
is true. I think the Rodney King riots were genuinely spontaneous.
Okay.
I do not think these were genuinely spontaneous. Uh, to me, these have the hallmarks of having been pre-planned. Some logistical work was done, getting adequate number of rioters in place. Reminds me a little bit of the 70s, actually late 60s play, 70s movie. I don't even remember the name of it, but it's about a U.S. embassy under siege in a foreign country. And one of the people in the foreign country says, "We have to move quickly. The spontaneous mob is scheduled to arrive at 2." It's an old thing. The spontaneous mob that's scheduled to arrive at 2. The spontaneous mob that has a little bit of logistical work done. People have their plane tickets paid for. People are flied in. Of course, you have some locals, uh, but it's much protesting is semi-professional. That's an old thing. That's old hat. I remember talking to someone who was a Kent State student back in 1970. Not that this excuses the idiocy of someone who gave live rounds to the National Guard, but this student said she saw the buses coming in. Very few of the Kent State University protesters were students at Kent State University. Some of them were, but most of them were not. Lots of people getting bussed in. So we can have a really impressive protest.
Mm. One time we were talking with Tom Zimmer about black market tourism.
It's an interesting phrase.
Yes, I wonder if in a similar vein one can find black market protest organizers, right?
No,
That there's someone out there that if you know the right person, you can get a protest organized for you.
I remember in pilgrimage encountering a priest from Chicago, and in the course of our conversation, the phrase community organizer came up, and I asked him, "Well, what is a community organizer?" I'd heard the phrase before. I was young at the time and from Wyoming. "What is a community organizer?" And he said, "It's a professional pain in the ass." people, whose, people whose business is constructing protests and disruption, attempting to give some facade of spontaneity to this. In most cases, it's a facade. I don't think that was the case with the Rodney King riots. So I think those are genuinely spontaneous.
And is what leads you to that the time between the news of the crime and the riots themselves? Is it the
Yes, they
timing?
developed the timing. They developed very quickly, and they didn't arise out of an atmosphere of political tension. And you didn't have politicians promptly rushing to appear on the scene, uh, and journalists all prepared to give them their photo ops. So I think those are genuinely spontaneous. I don't think that this was. I think it developed in surprising ways.
Surprising even to the organizers.
We need to learn the old lesson. Huh. A mob. I keep thinking of Young Frankenstein. That movie formed my sense of humor. I watched it as a kid. My parents, I'm still in awe that they let us watch it. It could only have been because they never saw excerpts of it.
Ah.
But I still remember the inspector. "A mob is an ugly thing, and I think it's time we have one." Well, a mob isn't ugly. It's hard to control. So once they get out there, they're going to start doing things, destructive things, stupid things that the organizers didn't have in mind.
Are you talking about looting? Are you talking about violence? Are you talking about the particular slogans that are chanted?
All of the
All
above.
of the above.
All of the above. Uh, the political effect that the organizers hoped for was largely demolished by the horrifically stupid visual of protesters waving a Mexican flag, jubilantly surrounded by burning vehicles. This right away has the effect of destroying the political impact. The net beneficiary of this is Mr. Trump, who wisely follows, seems to me, wisely is following there. More reason for people to hate me. Following Napoleon's adage, never interrupt an opponent while he's making a mistake. quoting his best lines. That's a good one. This is a mistake. They didn't plan for this. They didn't plan for anyone to do something that stupid.
The flag or the cars or both?
Both. This is not they had in mind. They wanted ICE to be the bad guys. Now suddenly the protesters are the bad guys for a perfectly good reason.
They're behaving like bad guys.
They're behaving like bad guys. Foreign invading bad guys. I mean, the sheer stupidity, the sheer stupidity. I do not like stupidity. Can you tell? Stupidity makes me mad.
Yeah.
No
Yeah.
matter where you are politically, when you act stupidly, I get angry. That happens with people I'm sympathetic with politically. Uh, it's just the sheer stupidity of gleefully waving the Mexican flag while you're in America, surrounded by vehicles you just set on fire. Sheer stupidity of it is mind-numbing.
Even if you didn't set them on
Even if
fire,
fire, that's a
people are going to see one image
yes.
that encapsulates what they think the net result is.
This image was not designed by the Trump people, but it's all to their benefit. And it has the effect of pushing, I feel it myself. I feel myself. More reasons people hate me, but you know, people are kind of on the fence on this issue, kind of pushing us off the fence. This is not acceptable. I don't care what the exact issues are. This is not acceptable.
Hmm. As in, even you can't now win a political argument by bringing out stories of some poor Mexican rose
Changed who the
seller.
bad guys are.
So you can't say poor Emilia Perez is being persecuted. All she was doing was selling roses at street corners.
Right.
Now she's being deported.
This has substantially lost its effect.
Interesting.
This is a very powerful visual. That's what's cropped up in world media again and again and again. I like to survey world media. It's an enormously powerful visual with visceral effects.
I'm curious though if it could potentially have them send a message of the government doesn't have control over the American homeland.
But that also supports Trump's position. He has argued that we had a kind of invasion and have lost control of the part of the American land. So we need to regain control. No, it's a classic to use. How often do you use soccer terms? Not very often. But it's a classic own goal. You just go to goal for the other side. Now, so the future, you might be able to have some plays of your own, but give up on this one.
Ah,
Give up on this one. Pull the plug on your riot. By now, you've already lost control of it. Maybe you can't pull the plug. Pull the plug on trying to spin this in a way that's helpful to you. That ship has sailed. Make a face-saving statement about how, while we recognize that the administration has overreacted, blah, 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 we still cannot tolerate this. We still deplore this collapse of law and order and this kind of conduct, and our case has to be advanced in other ways. Just close the door on this episode as gracefully as you can. You know it's going to crop up in political ads in future elections. Real damage has been done. It's the way of really stupid moves. So you have to recalibrate and reconsider, seriously, reconsider the strategy of mass protest, which requires, of course, organization and logistics. It's never that spontaneous. Reconsider that strategy. It's not the winner you think it is.
somebody is being taught that this is the way to affect the changes that you want.
This is how community
Do
organizing.
you think that the George Floyd incident was seen as a victory for the tactic of mass protests? It was a victory. So someone took the lesson of, oh, this is the way to do it.
Yes. But um, in this particular case, the optics are catastrophically bad for that position.
I wonder what the difference is.
4 years.
4 years.
4 years, and the specific issue of immigration versus invasion, uh, the disastrous graphic, that disastrous image, uh, tilts the argument in a very visceral way. Tilts it. It gives the advantage to the side that says no. This is invasion.
Interesting.
This
And
is
there's
invasion.
no counter image, right? Like the Derek Chauvin and George Floyd, there were pictures of
Exactly.
the perpetration of the crime,
Mhm.
right? Of the guy kneeling on Floyd's neck. So
Right.
there was images to throw in your direction.
Right.
What are you going to do? Show a picture of an ICE agent going in through a door,
Yeah. If you can show,
crying children? You can probably
you can find something
cook up
certainly, but
that.
no, this is uh, it's hard to recover from that kind of a mistake.
Hmm.
And even if the other side does obnoxious things, this is the one that sticks. It's a little like in the French Wars of Religion. Uh, the Huguenot never recovered, you know, any civil war. I'm not saying we're in a civil war, right? But it's an internal conflict. Uh, to use the Clausewitzian phrase, war is a continuation of politics by other means.
Hmm.
So, in a civil struggle, let's say, it's above all a struggle for hearts and minds. Uh, and when you blunder badly early on, even if the other side makes their own blunders, people remember what you did. So the Huguenots, early on in the French Wars of Religion, they asked for English help. In France, in the 16th century, seriously, one side in a civil war asked for English help. Did that win the middle ground? No, that pushed people off the fence the other way.
Ah,
It was a catastrophic blunder. Now, after
because
that,
we
English,
don't want English coming over here.
English. After that, the Catholic League asked for Spanish help. Now, that was bad, but not as bad as English. You asked for English help? The people who, in past times, have looted and burned their way through France?
Hmm.
You ask for English help? It was an astonishingly stupid thing to do. Uh, and the Huguenot cause, despite blunders by the Catholic League, never recovered from that. Uh,
Save your blunders for later.
blunders by the, in a lot of ways, the
Don't
first,
open with a blunder.
yeah, first side that blunders badly loses
Hmm.
the build up to the Civil War. Lincoln was able to rally the North for a military campaign after the South fired in Fort Sumter. It would have been awfully hard to do, but they're firing on the flag. It would have been hard to rally the
It made
country
it easy
otherwise.
to cast the Southern cause as a foreign cause, as an enemy cause.
Treasonous cause.
Hmm.
Uh, Before that, it seemed like a constitutional argument that just causes your head to ache. Um,
Statesmen going back and forth about it
yeah,
in highfalutin language in Washington.
exactly. Quoting the Federalist Papers, the Anti-Federalist Papers, and Jefferson said this, and Hamilton said that. But no, they're shooting at the flag. That got the North roused. The South never recovered from it. Once the North was roused, they were going to lose.
They didn't have the men, they didn't have the equipment, they didn't have the manufacturing.
Right.
They couldn't do it unless they asked the British for help. That would be funny. Rule
Well, they pretty
Rule number one, never ask the British for help on your own territory.
Yeah, well, they did try to ask the British for help, but there was one great obstacle to the British helping:
The Atlantic?
slavery.
Oh,
With the British Navy, what's the Atlantic Ocean? But for British public opinion to back the side that practiced slavery on an industrial scale.
on an industrial scale.
Yeah,
That
that
was
has to be said, on an industrial scale.
right.
It was not just a decorative feature. But the North was not going to get roused over that. Again, not the visceral thing that pushes people off the fence. On the one hand, on the other hand, yeah, there's a slavery thing. On the other hand, it is how the majority of the population has voted. On the one hand, we don't want the union broken up. On the other hand, do we really want to be killing lots of people over this? What pushes them off the fence in the end? What pushed them off the fence in the end was something quite visceral. They shot at the flag, Fort Sumter.
Okay. That was an image that's easy to bear in mind.
Yes. Eduardo Verástegui, the Mexican actor, had a good statement about events in Los Angeles. In my opinion, a very good statement. And he said, the flag of Mexico is not a toy. The flag of the United States is not a toy. You do not burn the flag of the United States because you want to make a political point. It's not a toy. You don't wave around the flag of Mexico, especially in a foreign country, because you want to make a point. It's not a toy. These things have meaning for an awful lot of people. They're visceral.
Flags always have been.
And that's another thing. They're also burning the flag. This is also deeply visceral.
Mm-hmm.
It gets a lot of us very, very angry. Stupid thing to do. The old, the precursor to Bernie Sanders.
Well, I saw in the
Who
airport.
you saw in the
I
airport.
saw in the airport.
To his credit.
Yeah, Monday.
To his credit, lined
Yeah.
up at security.
Lined up, right? He was right behind me in security. I turned around. Bernie?
Right behind you?
Yeah. Yeah, I turned around. I was lacing up my shoes and walked through Bernie Sanders. So,
To his credit.
to his credit, indubitably, to his credit that he was amongst the plebs.
Yes, I'm impressed.
What did you talk to him?
No, admittedly, it took me a minute to realize, oh, that is Bernie Sanders, because one never expects to see the faces from TV
Right next
or
to you
the
in line.
internet next to you in line at the Burlington International Airport with its 8 gates. And in fact, even after he passed me and I thought, that's Bernie, I didn't really believe it until I saw the reaction of the rest of the people who were clearly recognizing him as well. So I was saying to Padre, I should have tried to get him on the podcast. Bernie!
Let's come to Wyoming.
Bernie, come to Wyoming! Or heck, we'll come to you. Come on the podcast.
Oh, wow. That'd
Yeah.
be crazy.
It would be fun. It would be fun.
Be perennial socialist candidate for president in the earlier part of the 20th century. In old age in the 1960s, he was asked about Vietnam protesters burning the American flag. And he said, bad idea. He quipped, a better gesture would be washing it. But he said, bad idea. I can speak to, I'm of the age I can remember, barely remember, right? Not that old, but barely remember my parents having some thoughts in the early 70s about Vietnam War protesters. For them, the antics of the protesters pushed them off the fence. They were very unsure about this mess in Vietnam, but burning the flag that's visceral.
Beyond the pale.
Beyond the pale, it's visceral. Classically Aristotle. I'm going to mention Aristotle again. That's 2 times tonight.
Good.
Good. In his rhetoric, famously, Aristotle said that people are persuaded by logos, ethos, pathos. Let's put it differently. The order is logos at the bottom, pathos, the appeal to logos, the appeal to reason, pathos, the appeal to emotion above that, ethos, the appeal to perceived character. That's at the top. Now, character is demonstrated, perceived character is demonstrated in simple, visceral ways. It's hard to bounce back from that. You could be the nicest person in the world. If somebody gets a film of you kicking a puppy, you're done.
Hmm.
Your perceived character is toast. Burnt toast. Toast that's being tossed into the trash. Your perceived character is severe. Your perceived character is wrecked once you fired on the flag and you're an ordinary citizen in Vermont, let's say, who's not terribly concerned, basically, about how they want to organize things in North Carolina, but they fired on the flag. They must be rotten SOBs. Similarly, ordinary citizen in Wyoming, you're not sure what to make of our ongoing and deeply dissatisfying adventure in Vietnam, but these people are burning the flag.
They must be opposed to something I support.
Yes. They can't be good people. So it's similar in this case. The blow to perceived character is you can't recover it. So no matter how many protests they have at this point, they've lost. At this point, there needs to be recalibration. To his credit, saying nice things about Democrats too, so don't hate me. To his credit, John Fetterman has been giving advice to his party about how to recalibrate and go forward. This strategy of get your activists out there screaming and eventually throwing things, it's not effective.
The strategy of outrage.
Strategy of outrage.
We're really upset.
We know
again.
No, it's not again. We're really upset still, perpetually upset. It's like the Aryan gloom goblin having attempted to gloom the world into embracing her climate change policies. She has now embraced a new cause. Not that.
Oh, yeah.
The Israeli government is above criticism, far from it. But who imagines, except of course, a handful of professional activists, who imagines that recruiting the Aryan gloom goblin is going to be changing hearts and minds in Israel? She's upset. Of course she's upset. This is a new thing for us to be upset about. She is perpetually upset. Upset is her shtick. Use a Yiddish term. Upset is her shtick. It is her thing. It's what she does. It is her one act. Her one act is upset. And at this point, it's an old act.
She's not even 25.
Enough already. We know you're upset. We know you're always upset. Go away.
Now she's sailing in boats. Did you see that?
Yeah, I guess eventually people want to know that you've got a party going on and they can join it. They don't want to know that if I join you, we're just going to have to be upset.
Perpetually upset.
Forever.
But one thing after another. And if you eventually get tired of saving the planet, there's another thing for you to be outrageously, endlessly upset about. A little like in high school. Oh my, there was one sister, God rest her soul, early 80s, early high school for me. We were always being asked to boycott something. That gets old quickly. Can't you have, to steal a military phrase, concentration of firepower? Pick one thing.
Pick one thing to be upset about.
Pick one thing you're going to work on. Consider your style for how you work on it, because a diet of perpetual outrage leaves you malnourished. So evolve a flexible strategy in dealing with it that goes beyond perpetual screaming and outrage and shock and horror and moral indignation. There's a place for those, but you have to have more than that.
But it's got to be, your shock has to be a bit of a shock to your audience. Like, oh my gosh, he's really upset about this.
Exactly. As opposed to, of course, she's upset. She's always upset. Of course she's mad as hell. She's always mad as hell.
How dare you?
Yes. It's just a tiresome act. You know, I think that one reason, it's a great humiliation to Americans, a great humiliation in our history that we were only able to abolish slavery in our country after a nasty, wicked civil war. And that was the worst way to abolish it because that meant that the enslaved population is now free in a part of the country that has been blown to bits. Uh, Utterly disastrous. Blown to bits and embittered. Utterly disastrous. Humiliating to us. Did it really take this to abolish slavery? So I ask, why was the American anti-slavery movement politically ineffective to a great degree? Uh, and I think one reason is, as opposed to the British there's more than one reason. There are many. It's complicated, but as opposed to the British anti-slavery movement, William Wilberforce et al., they kept their focus. We're focused on slavery. We're not going to be chasing after polygamy and going after the Mormons. We're not going to be chasing after women's rights and the early suffragette movement. We're not going to be chasing after alcohol and pushing for prohibition. We're not going to be attempting comprehensive social reform and perpetually hectoring people on every conceivable subject. We're going to focus on this.
And there's a great strength in that.
Great strength in that. Now people are going to criticize you. You're a single issue. Yes, we're a single issue. I'm glad you noticed. It's that important to us. This has to change. It's not bad to be single issue. If it's a big enough issue, doesn't mean there aren't other things to consider, but some things are so big, if we don't get this right, and slavery is one of those.
We're
If
lost.
we don't get this right, we're going to mess up permanently.
Mm.
So other things to consider, but let's get this right. Focus, but also when Wilberforce et al., they were very clear about this tone. We're single issue, we're remorseless, but we're not just going to be screaming, ranting, and raving. We're going to be the reasonable people.
Ah,
We're going to make a reasonable case. We're going to make it consistently. We're going to support this case with some striking visuals, which is slavery produced striking visuals. We're going to support this case with striking visuals, but we are not going to be the ranting, raving, spit flying out of our mouths people. Let the opposition do that. We're going to be the reasonable ones. And it worked.
it did win hearts and minds
Yeah,
gradually.
gradually. Gradually. Not successfully. The British Empire was able to abolish slavery. Now, there are other factors to consider in the case of our country, but it remains one of our great national humiliations with permanent enduring effects on our history.
Yes, that it took a war.
It took a nasty.
Wait, how many people were willing to fight over this?
Well, again, the visceral things. It was once the war, the great Civil War historian Shelby Foote liked to tell the story about the Southern soldier, prisoner of war. Why are you fighting? The Northern soldiers asked him, because you're here. That was the visceral thing. Armed foreigners in your neighborhood. Armed strangers, let's say. Armed strangers in your neighborhood. That's visceral. Makes you mad. For the North, as I say, the visceral thing was they fired on the flag.
That set it off, and
Set
then
it off.
there was a war to fight, and that
Yes.
is
Unfortunately,
motivating up to a point.
and Lincoln's dilemma was that to deal with secession, how was he to do it except by sending in troops? But the armed strangers in your neighborhood,
Produces a consistent effect.
yes.
People don't like it.
Yes. And I imagine that can happen in neighborhoods in Los Angeles.
I suppose, to give the devil his due, tactical, geared up ICE agents probably look a lot like strangers in your neighborhood as well.
Absolutely. I think that has to be considered. And I think going forward, we have to consider that. There are tactical reasons for that approach, but we have to consider the visceral effect. But at this moment, the advantage has been overwhelmingly given to the other side. Overwhelmingly given. This just so much so that just accept the loss on this one.
How does this come back to
Take a different tack.
how does this come back to LA specifically? I mean, are people going to look at LA and say, yes, the government of Los Angeles
Poor
has no
LA.
ability to
Poor California.
keep its people safe.
As if the wildfires weren't enough.
Right. And that was what, less than a year ago?
Less than a year ago. As if the general crime situation isn't enough. As if a friend of mine bringing his son to college a few years ago was just stunned by the sprawling homeless encampments
Hmm.
with the accompanying filth. Yeah, the California dream is badly battered at this point. And it'd be a long time to recover.
Are there
I think
more
this is,
homeless per capita than there were 20 years ago?
I don't know. I'll just say that I don't know.
Like, wait, like if you have a homeless encampment where there used to be no homeless encampment, one asks, well, where were these homeless living before? Unless there's a larger number of them per capita.
I don't know. I just say that. And I do not know how much that relates to immigration either,
Ah, interesting.
what that connection is, if any. I don't know. But I do know that these vast encampments of them are a relatively new thing.
Yes.
They were
Yes.
very startling to a elderly gentleman I knew. He was startled by them 12 years ago. Worked for the World Health Organization. He'd been retired for a while and is now deceased, but he commented on how, back in his World Health Organization days, he would have told government officials, you have to clean this up because there's going to be an outbreak of infectious disease.
People will be dying on the street.
Yes, got a collection of disease vectors at work here. Yeah, it's the California image and therefore the California appeal, therefore the California economy has been taking a lot of hits, and this is not going to help. And again, but this goes back to the need to recalibrate and just take a different approach. And that's going to be very hard for the established leadership in California because they have become acclimatized, over adapted like a dinosaur, over adapted to a particular environment, over adapted to a particular style.
Which is we're very compassionate, which means
We're
we
very
let you do what you do.
except we're thoroughly angry. Go back and forth between being exceedingly compassionate and being utterly indescribably outraged. And that too, that yeah, good heavens, you're gonna do physical damage to yourself swinging back and forth like that. Endlessly compassionate, unbelievably outraged. Sweetly compassionate, unbelievably outraged. It's recalibration of style. That's going to take another generation of politicians. Can't teach an old dog new tricks. We've done a really good job trying to teach this old dog some jujitsu, but it's not an easy thing to teach old dogs new tricks. It's going to take a new generation of politicians in
I don't
California.
feel like Gavin Newsom is enough of a chameleon that he could become the champion of law and order 2 years from now.
Ooh,
He seems pretty chameleon-esque to me.
you'd have to start now.
Start now.
If he's a smart man, he will start now. This is the moment. I say recalibrate. He might be just young enough to pull it off.
Hmm.
An older generation, a politician, it's just pure Maxine Waters. It's what she's been doing for decades. She's going to keep doing. Uh, Again,
It's second nature. They don't even have to think about it.
it's right. Her instant approach to things, utter complete outrage. He's young enough, he might be able to, but you have to do it now. This is the time to recalibrate.
This is the time for him to declare, "Oh, my eyes have been opened. We need We do need law and order.
Back off on the specific issue of immigration.
Uh-huh.
He just has to put that on the back burner now and say what I said earlier, law and order is the first duty of government.
Mm-hmm.
So we're going to take the safety of the people, the citizens of California, residents of California seriously. To take their safety seriously, we're going to address issues of law and order.
Yeah, I think he's already hurt himself with that because um, Trump signed in the Marines and he was really upset about that. And he said that Trump never even called, didn't even leave a voicemail about it. And then Trump pulled up his call history and it was to get him. It was shared it on the news.
Hello.
Yeah.
It would take some agility. We'll see if he can pull it off. He'd have to start doing it now.
Yeah.
In the moment of a crisis,
Yes.
that he can actually say, well, I have a track record of supporting law and order.
Exactly.
Babylon B has been making some great ones about it. There was one. It was the mostly peaceful protesters are now being handled by the mostly peaceful Marines.
Mostly peaceful is such a perfectly asinine phrase.
Mm.
Mostly peaceful. That is to say, only 10% of them are burning down buildings.
Yep.
Yeah.
Soundful?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
A little too much.
Right. There are no public calls for the burning of buildings, but if it accompanies every protest, people are going to start questioning the integrity of the movement.
Yes, and yes, that's the integrity of the movement is so badly battered now. I'm repeating myself.
Hmm.
Just recalibration is needed.
Well, I think I think this is also coming out now. Like, you know that gentleman? No, he's not a gentleman. That guy that was deported. They called him the
Yeah,
Maryland.
not gentlemen, yes.
That Maryland father dude.
Hmm.
He was an illegal part of MS-13. He has the tattoo on his hand.
Okay.
Bukele looked into him, found out he's MS-13. Trump looked into him, MS-13. DOJ looked into him, MS-13.
This is the American citizen who was sent
No,
to.
No,
This is a different
he was
incident.
illegal.
Went to prison in El Salvador
Yep.
and without doing adequate homework, they've got staffs. This makes, again, I don't like stupidity, no matter where it is on the political spectrum. Look at staffs. Why didn't they even do this homework? But there were some Democratic politicians who decided they'd do a little political theater and go visit this poor fellow in El Salvador.
Why him? What's his?
Because they're trying to make him a saint, saying that Trump is so bad for sending away this dad of kids who's trying to make a better life for his family in America. But because Trump is so harsh that he's deporting an illegal immigrant, that they should need to stop all these deportations and stop all of this.
He was their hastily adopted poster boy.
Exactly. Yeah.
Since dropped because once actual homework was done,
They found
They
out that
realized
he was
he's not a good poster boy.
he's not a good poster boy.
MS-13 and allegedly a pedophile.
I shouldn't. Oh, I shouldn't laugh, but
Yeah.
you laugh or you cry. Yeah, you laugh or you cry. We're dealing with important things here, and shoddy work like that. That's shoddy.
Well, and the thing is like all of these Democrats are bending over backwards to defend murderers, rapists, and drug dealers.
Well, yeah, I avoid saying all these, but the fact that you said all these, that helps demonstrate my point. The battle for perceived character has been lost
Yeah.
on this issue. It's been lost.
Well, it's the thing is, it's like we're. I don't know many Americans that are against immigration if it's legal.
Yeah.
Most Americans are immigrants.
The
We're just,
and children.
yeah.
Well, for a few grandchildren of immigrants, or grandson or great grandson of immigrants.
Probably great grandson.
Great grandson for you.
Yeah.
Great grandson.
Yeah, for me, great grandson. Yeah, even though I'm somewhat older.
Yeah.
but not that far back.
Great, yeah, maybe great on my part. I'd have to see on the Norwegian branch of the family, the Lifrigs. Yeah.
Except for they've got one branch of the family tree. That's the branch that has Irish on it. But that branch has been in the United States since the 1850s. That's the only one that's been here for a long time. So yeah, the others, my great grandparents.
Hmm.
So not that far back. It's cliche, but great deal of truth to the cliche. A nation of immigrants, but I think that people are reasonably convinced that there needs to be control. Now, if you really wanted an intelligent campaign, if you really believed, you really thought that the measures of enforcement, the enforcement measures taken by ICE are inappropriate, if you really thought that, and you were intelligent, you'd have designed a very different campaign. In particular, you'd have pulled off what Republicans were able to do in the case of Elian Gonzalez back in the 90s. You know that.
Oh, I remember the kid from Cuba.
Yeah. And
That
that
was remarkable.
spectacular picture, just deadly optics.
Yes, of him and the uncle in the closet.
Yes.
No, was it his uncle or was it the actual fisherman who had helped
I
bring him
believe
in?
his uncle.
Okay.
And the armed agent, his finger not on the trigger,
His
nonetheless.
Right, right. No, good tactical control, but all suited up in tactical
Yeah.
gear, looking
Disastrous optics.
looking at this terrified child and his alarmed uncle.
And clearly terrified child.
Yes.
Naturally terrified. You can talk about the good tactical reasons for it. You can talk about the rest of the story, but the optics kill you. Can't get over that picture.
Hmm.
Uh,
This kid is definitely the victim.
right. So it's similar in this case. Uh, the optics have cooked you, and such stupidity as not properly researching your poster boy before you make him a poster boy. Ah!
Well, that is troubling, right? You'd think that you'd want your staff to have the capability to, even on the fly, come up with a good
Yeah.
a good portfolio. This is who we're going to defend. This is who we're going to put in the role of victim. Even very quickly, we've been able to say, yeah, this person looks like he was working a nondescript but appropriately servile job that everyone can feel as if he's just
Some sympathy.
meek and humble of heart, and he's got kids. Huh. They picked the wrong guy. Is that stupidity or was it arrogance? So I just go pick one.
Nothing produces stupidity quite like arrogance. Classic Greek tragedy understood this, right? Hubris generates nemesis. Hubris produces poor judgment. Poor judgment, I don't remember the Greek word for that. So I'll use some Latin, mea culpa. But anyway, hubris produces poor judgment. Poor judgment produces nemesis. Classic pattern. I'm going to talk about you. I'm going to say something Euripides for a second time this evening. Alexander the Great's favorite author. Classic pattern in Greek tragedy. Classic pattern in history. Great Arnold Toynbee had that as one of the major themes of his magnum opus, Study of History, mid-20th century. He argued that was played out again and again in human affairs. Institutionally as well, hubris exists. Hubris generates poor judgment. And poor judgment produces nemesis. So arrogance and stupidity are closely allied. Arrogance produces stupidity.
Because you ultimately underestimate your opponent,
you
or
overestimate yourself and underestimate
you overestimate yourself. Yes. I wonder if the staffs of Ocasio-Cortez or Maxine Waters or Elizabeth Warren or any of these people, I wonder if their research staffs are all educated in the same places. They all think generally along the same lines. They believe that
suspect that they're recruited mainly for political reliability, and promoted mainly on the basis of loyalty to the boss.
That thought had not occurred to me that it was that loyalty was more valuable than
Loyalty to the boss.
ability, loyalty to the boss.
So the people who get to the top are not the most able, the most loyal.
Most loyal.
Being the most loyal, are they willing to speak truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth to the boss? Going back to the book about Alexander the Great, when his army had bloody well had enough, the one general who was able to speak for the army was Craterus. Craterus had unimpeachable loyalty, but also, he died not long after he spoke for the whole army to say to Alexander politely, hell no, uh, we fought with you all the way for 10 years from Macedonia to the Indus River. It's enough. Craterus could say it because he had unquestionable loyalty, but also he died not long after. Some of the more scandal mongering conspiracy theorist types said that Alexander poisoned him. Much more likely, he was sick. He knew he was going to die soon. Therefore, he had nothing to lose
Hmm.
in saying to Alexander what needed to be said. And he had the background that compelled Alexander to listen. Uh, Typically, though, you don't have a Craterus, someone who is unimpeachably loyal, but also able and sensible, and also nothing to lose. He has nothing more to gain from the boss. So you can tell the boss what needs to be said. And I think that's very rare.
It's one of the chief perils of power is that your
Absolutely.
very power silos you away from the truth.
Exactly.
You'd have to make a special effort to find people who are able to tell the truth in the face of power. You'd have to make you have to make special efforts.
Yes. It takes a very confident man to pick strong, independent minded people to work with. So, going back to making people hate me, it takes a confident man like Donald Trump to take the risk of picking an Elon Musk who's going to speak his mind to work with him. I think there's some risk in picking a J.D. Vance, who is no shrinking violet,
Hmm.
uh, picking him as vice president. J.D. Vance I think he's loyal to Trump, but he's not a quiet, shy, timid character.
No,
Uh,
not a lapdog.
Not a lapdog. It takes a very confident leader, a genuinely confident leader, to pick strong subordinates surrounding him.
Subordinates that are strong enough that people might compare the two of you.
Exactly. Bit of a risk. Lincoln was willing to do that.
Hmm.
He was willing to have Seward in his cabinet, famously, as Secretary of State. Seward had been a political rival. Lincoln was a very able man. It was generally, he didn't say it publicly, but it was generally known that he tended to think of that he thought of himself as more able than Lincoln. Which
But
was
Lincoln said, "Fine. What I really need is your abilities,
yes.
and I'm not primarily concerned with what you think of me."
Yeah. And that's an indication of Lincoln's, despite his profound melancholy, that was an indication of his basic self-confidence and basically justified self-confidence. It takes strong leaders to do that. More common, a leader surrounds himself with, as the saying goes, yes men. People who will say what
They think
the
is,
leader wants to hear.
I see.
So I've been reading a fine trilogy about World War II in the Pacific. Striking thing about MacArthur versus Nimitz, the two American commanders who split up the Pacific, both very able. I speak somewhat in defense of MacArthur. Press really built him up. So because they built him up, it became fashionable for a long time to tear him down. A little bit of balance. He was very able, but he built a staff of yes men. So there were not people on his staff who had the ability to speak hard truths to him. And even a very able man will miss things and make mistakes. And if he doesn't have people who can say, sir, all due respect, you might want to reconsider this. General Eichelberger tried once, never did it again. Back in the days when he was a subordinate of MacArthur, Eisenhower tried once, never did it again. And eventually in Korea, that led MacArthur to disaster. Versus Nimitz. He expected proper military protocol, of course, but he was willing to have some distinctly independent characters on his staff who could speak to him directly,
Mm,
politely,
politely.
politely, but directly.
Sir, with all due respect, your head is up your ass.
That would not have worked.
That would not have worked. Yes. Yes, that is not enough due respect.
Franklin Roosevelt as president, I have to say, times we've talked before, you may have guessed I'm not necessarily his biggest fan, but as president, he was willing to have, particularly in the military leadership, he was willing to have distinctly strong characters who were not yes men.
Who do you have in mind?
General Marshall,
Uh-huh.
Admiral King, right at the top of the list. General Marshall and Admiral King were so formidable in their different ways that Harry Hopkins in the Roosevelt's right-hand man, had the brilliant wisdom to put Admiral Leahy, old friend of Roosevelt's, on the Joint Chiefs as just kind of the liaison between Roosevelt and the two very formidable chiefs of the Army and the Navy. Very formidable in different ways. King was more prone to lose his temper publicly, or semi-publicly.
Like at meetings of high-ranking officials. Okay. Not in front of crowds.
Not frightening, no. Marshall, not that stubbed. He could be very frightening. Patton is supposed to have said that he was more afraid of Marshall than he was of a German tank division. It's typical hyperbole.
Sure.
King, interestingly, when he wanted to, a lot of people didn't believe this. When he wanted to, he could be charming. Some stage, but also, despite his temper, he had people who could speak to him. His lawyer could speak to him. His lawyer, of all people, said to Admiral King, your relations with the press are so bad that, you have enemies in Washington, D.C. Who doesn't have enemies in Washington, D.C.? Does that ever change? That never changes. Do you have enemies in Washington, D.C.? Your relations with the press are bad. That's the enemies are going to use that against you. You've got to do something about this. King did not like reporters. His lawyer convinced him. So a generally self-confident man can be convinced. He had to change these things. He had to change the way he did some things. So he told his lawyer, you find me a group of reporters who have some status, but also that I can trust are not going to reprint what I say in the newspaper, and I'll have a meeting with them. So a house was picked in a DC suburb. The admiral came in, reporters came in, drinks were served, and over the drinks, the admiral just drank beer, 2 beers, I believe, the first meeting. But over the beers, he just answered their questions. He told them right at the start, what you say in this meeting, what I say in this meeting, you have to promise me you're not going to print in the newspapers. But with that promise, I'll answer all of your questions. And for the next 2 hours, he just had them entranced. They were military professionals, but they'd ask questions and he would take them through the background for a particular decision, what some logistical considerations are, maybe some things you didn't realize what this weapon is capable of, what this one is.
Hmm.
Don't print that in the newspaper. The Japanese don't need to know this. Had them absolutely entranced. And they felt, it had happened before, they felt terribly offended. Just this is classified, this is classified, this is classified. Now they felt that he let them in on the secret.
Ah,
And now
this is why it's classified.
right,
Now you know.
now that they were let on in the secret. I don't know if that would work today or not, but now that they were let in on the secret, they were willing to keep it because we're part of the in group.
I see.
We're sitting at the cool kids table. We're sitting at the cool kids table. We are sitting with the chief of naval operations, and he is answering every question we put to him. And it was such a success. He would do that every couple of months. Very so very confident man.
Hmm.
Paradoxically, a very confident man is capable of changing his mind and changing his approach to something. Okay, I'm not going to treat the press like the enemy. I'm going to let some of them in to the inner circle.
Ah.
I'm going to bring them into the cool kids table.
Hmm.
I'm going to tell them exactly what's going on.
It takes a certain kind of confidence to change tack.
And
Interesting.
that's not typical
Especially in military circles or
in any
in
circles. In any circles. Yes, you get high in rank in any organization. You've got there by doing what you do.
ah.
So once you're in a high position to change the way you do things, then
That's threatening.
only very confident people could do that. Genuinely confident.
And when you say confident, you mean they have a belief in their own agency somehow, or what?
They do. They believe in their abilities.
Hmm.
They believe in their abilities. Can this belief sometimes be delusional? Yes.
Hmm.
But if you don't believe in your abilities,
Can't get anything done.
but that story of Admiral King just so impresses me. Is he who did not like press conferences, did not like reporters,
Was able to do a 180 on it.
able to do a 180 and just charm professional newspapermen and win them over to his side basically in one meeting.
Wow.
And only a very confident man would have dared attempt that.
Hmm.
It's a complete change of tack. You describe it well. Moving from classified, we won't tell you, to okay, here we are in this secret meeting, just me and these reporters, me, one Marine guard, and these reporters, and we're having beers. You just ask and I'll answer as long as you promise you're not going to put it in the newspapers.
This is interesting. So, talk about changing tacks, but in previous conversations we've had here, and I mentioned this last night when we were at dinner, but
You did.
we've often talked about the wisdom of leaving well enough alone
And the trick is,
to know when to leave
when
well
is well
enough.
enough?
When
What
is
is well enough?
what is well enough? Yeah. I mean, it seems to me that the immigration issue is sort of now running parallel with the issue of law and order, particularly in
Yeah.
Los Angeles. So now you kind of have these two parallel and linked issues.
Once they become parallel and linked, that gives a decisive advantage to the restrictive side of the immigration discussion because law and order is a winning issue, always a winning issue.
People always like law and order,
Yes.
unless you're like a really radical anarchist.
Classic definition of a liberal, a classic definition of a strong conservative is a liberal who's been mugged. When you experience crime, just once, when you experience crime, you become a fan of law and order.
Right.
If you ever have to call the police, you become a fan of the police. Uh, and most people have experienced crime at least once. Maybe most people have had to call the police. So almost always law and order is a winning issue. So now that the immigration issue has been linked, parallel and linked to law and order, yeah, decisive advantage to one side.
Interesting.
The protest strategy was risky because I said earlier, they didn't plan, the people who planned the protests didn't plan the riots.
Uh-huh.
But your protests get out of hand unless you've got very disciplined people. Very disciplined people like the pro-life marchers in DC. Never
Who pick up their garbage.
who pick up their garbage. They literally pick up their garbage. People shout things. They're just quiet. They just pray. They're very disciplined.
And they do it year after year,
Here.
coming in from all over the country. There's a cultural force to their discipline.
Exactly.
They don't have to be coached into
They
it.
have to be coached. Their background helps them. A little bit of what Sam Adams said about Boston. The Christian Sparta, the discipline of Boston that made citizens of Massachusetts able to fight British regulars on day one of the Revolution.
Mm.
That discipline had cultural roots. So protest is going to be a disaster. And Mahatma Gandhi talked about this with nonviolent resistance. Martin Luther King Jr. talked about this. You can't do it with just a random crowd. These things do have to be planned. But where the recent planners go wrong is not just planned, but people have to be formed. The discipline to be nonviolent. But you're not going to have the discipline to be nonviolent if your leaders have adopted the style of loud outrage, which is not the style of Mahatma Gandhi. He was not a ranter or raver. It was not the style of Martin Luther King Jr. He was not a ranter and raver. Strong, clear, but carefully prepared, substantially high diction, certain display of erudition, clear, firm, calm, not ranting and raving. So again, I repeat myself, but I think it's basically a good thing, apart from specific issues. I'm optimistic that I'm convinced the ranting and raving style of politics has hurt us.
But are you also convinced that it's on its way out?
I'm convinced it's on its way out. I'm almost convinced it's on its way out. It's lost its effectiveness because it's tiresome. You get really tired of angry outrage.
Of being berated?
Yes. You quickly get very tired of being berated. Angry outrage loses its effectiveness. Angry outrage is to political style what four-letter words are to journalism. It's not quite never, it's close to never.
Mm.
That way, when you do use it,
Mm-hmm.
it has an effect.
Yeah.
Use it often, it doesn't have an effect.
Right.
Yeah.
Like saffron. You want just a pinch.
That's a good way to put it. A cook's way to put it. Just a pinch. Just a pinch of angry outrage, carefully held in storage for the proper occasion. But if that is the only way you know how to do things, Maxine Waters, pay attention. You wait for her to pay attention. If angry outrage is the only way you know how to do things, you're going to become ineffective.
Mm. Yeah. Um,
Imagine,
so
imagine the failure that the civil rights movement would have been had its leadership gone on stage ranting and raving.
Could have
No,
been led by Al
they let
Sharpton.
the other side. They let the other side be the bad guys. So that the optics were police attack dogs
Water hoses.
and water hoses on nonviolent protesters. You let the other side be the bad guys. It was successful. You appeal, it is rooted in a certain optimism that the American people can be persuaded.
People will get on our
People
side,
on our side.
and they
Uh,
let someone else on the other side, well, we're going to deal with this once and for all.
exactly.
Well, it was once and for all, except
It's
that you lost.
it's a risk, and you have to take. Gandhi and King both talked about this. The nonviolent route takes courage, but its power is precisely in letting the other side be the bad guys. But in this particular instance, that advantage was thrown away,
Hmm.
um, foolishly thrown away. But now there's nothing to do except just repeat myself, but recalibrate, readjust, and
Right.
start to sound moderate. Of course, there's a need to control immigration. This should not be a controversial thing to say. The controversy should be about exactly how, what means. Uh,
I think there's someone on the other side who is saying this at this moment. People should be allowed to live where they want. That should not be a controversial thing to say.
well, that's your if that's the attitude, it's going to fail because it's so obviously stupid. Uh,
But it sounds compassionate or sounds liberating.
at a very superficial level, it sounds compassionate,
Hmm.
but public by a significant majority is unpersuaded by that, partly because people can imagine 10,000 people moving into the neighborhood.
Ah,
It's,
I
uh,
want to, I want to go, I want to go live in the Hollywood Hills.
yeah.
Well, do you have $8 million to buy even the
No.
most basic home in the Hollywood Hills? No.
So
Well, then you can't.
one
That
person, that's one thing. 10 people, 100 people moving into town all at once. Okay. 1,000,
hmm.
depending on the size of the town. 10,000? Uh, kind of notorious novel, French novel, notorious because it's been used by right-wing politicians in France, but it's an extended thought experiment, imaginative experiment, Camp of the Saints. So notorious novel, but it presents this situation where there's a tremendous famine in India, and people commandeer ships in India, and they're all sailing towards France. Like hundreds of thousands, millions of people, all sailing towards France. What does the French government do? So the novel builds from there. But it's interesting. It's a thought experiment, but it makes the point uh, to say let anyone come, no matter how many and how fast or how different in culture, is untenable. But once you acknowledge, as you have to acknowledge, that there is a need for some limit, then the discussion simply becomes what is the reasonable limit? And people can
So,
disagree strongly about that, but
but you have to move the discussion there,
you have to
or
move it.
or else the discussion reduces to absurdity.
Exactly.
Anyone has the right to live anywhere they want. That may sound good but then you follow that to its logical conclusion, even briefly,
Even briefly,
and
the
you
absurdity of it
realize,
emerges.
well, can I live in my parents' bedroom?
Yeah.
That doesn't seem great.
Anyone has an inherent right to live anywhere they want at any time. No,
I'd like to live at the White House.
it's quite evidently absurd.
Uh, Again, I think there are people who will say that, and in the moment that they say it, they sincerely believe it.
Yes,
And
but
they may not think about it much past that.
I'm repeating myself. I really don't like stupidity. Uh,
It's not that I raise it because these are the people with whom we must speak.
yes, but we have to, one has to start with an awareness that an intelligent discussion has to begin from a common basis And a very reasonable common basis is, yes, we should have a generous attitude to immigration,
Hmm.
but also, yes, there should be some control. We can't just open the gates and say, let theoretically any number of people come in at any time. Now, once those two things are accepted, there's still huge room for disagreement.
On how many, how quickly,
Yes.
and where.
There we've entered the realm of prudential judgment,
Mm-hmm.
and people of good conscience and goodwill and good intelligence can disagree on points of prudential judgment. But just this notion that there's some human right to move anywhere you want at any time, they think that, in discussion with actual people in a compassionate and respectful way, but it is stupid and has to be addressed as such.
Mm.
Now,
Yeah.
that doesn't mean that there's any obligation, moral or intellectual, to support the policies of the current government uncritically. It just means the discussion becomes one of prudential judgment rather than one of primal morality. In
That makes
practical
sense.
terms, primal discussion has been pretty much won by one side now, because the linkage has been made between the immigration issue and law and order. One side wins. This is not altogether good. I don't mean to suggest this is altogether good. It's just that the argument for immigration needed to be accompanied by respect for respect for law and order.
And law and order includes things like people's the rights they have when they own their own property.
Yes,
That was involved as well.
it's involved as well. The right of a nation to exist, which means it has a border. I'm of the opinion, actually, that our immigration system needs to be simplified. And I think legal immigration could easily stand to be more generous. But you can't just say doing that illegal immigration. So what is it really illegal? That you shouldn't have laws to guide this, policies and procedures. I think there should be simpler policies and procedures. But you have to have some.
Hmm. And what ICE, do you agree with this, that what ICE is attempting in LA and other cities is a reversal of its own de facto policies from 1, 2, 3, 4 years ago?
Yeah, well, that gets into very sensitive political territory, but
Hmm.
certainly from their perspective, what they see is a need to make up for unacceptably lax enforcement for too long. And I think a reasonable critique can be made of their methods.
Ah,
The defense of their methods is that we're confronted with their defense of their methods is that we're confronted with a situation that is so far deteriorated.
that any attempt at correction is going to be drastic.
Yes, that would be their argument.
That, yes, we know we're steering the car into the ditch, but somebody pointed the car downhill and took the foot off the brakes,
So
and the car has to be stopped somehow.
that's right. The ditch is the best option.
Right. But it's not great.
It's not great. Yeah, I think if the criticism, an opinion, right? But I think the criticism of ICE, if it had been couched in terms of method and tactics, I think that could have persuaded a lot of us who were pretty much on the fence. And at this point, we have to be even lured back on the fence before we can go to the other side. It's frustrating that the response was not based, was not focused on tactics, and was not rooted in respect for law and order. That's what I'll say. Respect for law and order doesn't mean saying the police can do whatever they want to do, right? Law guides the police as well. Law governs the police as well. They need to be held to standards of law as well. So, could go back to the defund the police thing of 4 years ago. That's absurd. Defund the police. Uh, I am interested in a criticism of the police, and I'll listen to a criticism of the police that is rooted in respect for law and order. That says just the police need to respect law and order themselves. So
But if
similarly,
it comes from no, anarchy is better or law is unnecessary,
yes, and that has to be fought. So I'll listen to a critique of the police that's rooted in
the
respect.
police are not themselves the agents of law and order.
That's right. That's rooted in respect for law and order. That simply says the police also have to obey law and order. So similarly, I would listen to a critique of ICE that is rooted in law and order. That simply says they need to be lawful and orderly. But I will not listen. I will not listen. I cannot take seriously a critique that is rooted in such absurdities as people have a right to move anywhere they want, anytime they want. Still less protests that become violent and overtly. Again, I don't think that's what I think this is the planners planned for. The protests that turn violent and overtly hostile to this country, burning the American flag and waving a foreign flag of a country I like. A mí me gustó mucho México. Quería pasar más tiempo en México.
Ah, sin
No en
duda.
las ciudades del norte, pero ciudades en el centro de México como Pueblo, like Mexico, but it's a foreign country. It's a good foreign country, and I am of the opinion I'm sympathetic with Mexicans who want Mexico to remain Mexico, and are a little bit distressed by the triumph of American fast food. When Mexico has such excellent cuisine traditions.
Mm. And is actually remarkably fast most of the time.
Yes. Yeah, so I cited Eduardo Verastegui's statement. Mexican flag is an honorable thing.
Mm.
It's not a toy for you to play with. Men have died bravely, sometimes in American hands, but men have died bravely for the Mexican flag. Men have died bravely for the American flag. It's not a toy either. American flag is not a toy that you can show your current irritation by burning it. Mexican flag is not a toy that you can show the way you feel about an American political issue by waving it around in America. These are important things. And yeah, so until people like me, and I think there are a lot of people like me
Mm.
who are not firmly committed to either side, but we are not going to listen to the side that seems to be okay with burning the American flag.
Because it signals a unwillingness to take law and order as a foundational principle
principle,
of
and
society.
frankly, loving your country as a foundational principle,
Ah,
but also law and order as foundational. Yes. Now we can talk about what the laws should be. By all means, this is the point of democracy. Do talk about what the laws should be. Argue about what the laws should be, but obey the law as it currently exists. Or if you disobey the law because you think it's unjust, do so in the Gandhian King way. If the law arrests you, you let yourself get arrested.
bearing your wounds to the world, perhaps, for the political effect, but
Oh, yes. Neither Gandhi nor King hesitated to do that. That was the whole point, really.
mm,
But let the other
right. This
fight.
very arrest is unjust, but by my going along with it,
Yes.
I
But
show
I'll make
my,
it clear, I'm not going to back down. I'm going to say it's unjust. I'm going to say it, and you get to say, and the world will see pictures of the police manhandling my peaceful self and peaceful followers.
right, right.
It's a more moral position, but I argue in the long run, it's a more practical position in terms of getting results. Let the other side be the bad guy.
Look, let the other side look like thugs.
Yeah, let this side look like thugs. As I say again, the pro-life movement has benefited hugely from the discipline of its adherents, with very, very few exceptions. Uh, they have maintained public decorum. They even clean up after themselves. Very, very tiny protests. They benefited hugely from that. You let the other side be the bad guys. The shift to angry protest again. How can I prove this? I have suspicions. I think U.S. strategy in Vietnam was misguided. I think the Army was baffled by the situation in Vietnam. I think the Johnson administration had no idea what it was doing. In short, I think there were excellent reasons for opposing the war. Excellent, superb reasons, patriotic reasons for opposing the continuation of what we were unsuccessfully attempting to do in Vietnam. An excellent case could be made, but uh, when instead of making that case that this is not good for America, they were burning the American flag, taking pictures. Jane Fonda's famous catastrophe, taking pictures at a North Vietnamese anti-aircraft gun. No, I think that they actually, I think that popular support for the war in Vietnam would have eroded faster without the sillier protests. That there are many people who were very open to the argument this isn't good for the country, but they weren't open to people burning the American flag and insulting American servicemen
Right.
and defying law and order. So I think the civil rights movement was one of the great successes for its moral and intellectual discipline. I think that the anti-war movement in Vietnam was, I think it actually may have,
It prolonged the war.
I think it may have,
Jeez.
that lots of Americans who would naturally think this is a bad idea did not want to be identified with people who were flag burning and
Spitting on soldiers, calling them baby
yeah,
killers, that sort of thing.
exactly. Uh, and that's when a certain poison entered into American political activism. Began to suppose that the way to gain our objectives is to scare people. But at some point, you try to scare people, you can get a fight.
Right. What Martin Luther King did so well is that he set a vision,
Exactly.
a moral and intellectual vision.
Intellectual vision and a moral vision. We are not trying to scare people. They're trying to scare us, and we're not letting them scare us.
The only thing we fear is doing the wrong thing.
Exactly. Exactly.
Yeah.
A moral vision. We're not letting them scare us. They're the ones who are trying to scare people.
Ah,
We're not going to try to scare people.
right.
Obey us or we'll burn down the city. That's what we're going to do. In the long run, that fails.
Yeah.
In the long run, people will resist that.
Indubitably. Padre, we are once again out of time.
Right.
Well, thank you for coming and, as always, sharing a little bourbon and a lot of conversation.
Yeah.
It's always compelling.
Thank you very much.
All right. That's a wrap.
Good night.